like I said, we'll start with the literature review. So now, what's literature review basically is meant to give you a background on your research. Okay, you've identified your research title, you know what your objective is. Now you need to review the background information, which means existing information on that topic. This will involve key definitions and key concepts that are related to your research area. One research review firstly is to give your reader some information on what's on the background information on your research topic, as well as to show that you yourself that are carrying out your research, you understand your research area properly. All right. So usually in writing research papers or research projects, the literature review might be incorporated into the introduction section, which means it might be written together with the introduction section. But sometimes, especially for a beginner, it's better to separate them. Usually better to separate them. Okay. This allows you also to carry out a more thorough literature review, because the introduction section doesn't allow you to write a very thorough review of the literature. Now, the literature review serves several important functions, as I said earlier. One of them is that it ensures that you are not reinventing the wheel. Okay, that's one. That you're not. What I mean by reinventing the wheel is that you're not doing something that is totally new. You are doing something that is a continuation of what people have done before. All right. So what to say, you're continuing from where others have stopped. So before you start doing your own research, you have to review what others have done, see where they have stopped, identify. It could also probably tell you what are the gaps in knowledge, what are the things that you feel that the gaps you feel that you can fill, right? What has been done and what is left to be done. Make sure you can show these types of directions. Okay, so it shows that you're not reinventing the wheel, which is you're not doing it all over again. Okay, it gives credit to those who have laid the groundwork for your research. Okay, this also giving credit is very, very important in research. All right, so with proper citations, you cite the work of people that have worked in this area previously, people that have done research in this area previously. I told you guys to gather 25 references. So now in these 25 references, while you are writing, you cite them. You keep citing them, cite them. If you need some extra references, you are free to get that. But you cite all these references in your write-up. Okay, and this gives those people credit for what they have done. Also, it demonstrates your knowledge of the research problem. Okay, this is very, very important, especially at this stage. Literature review will help to show that you actually understand the domain in which you're carrying out your research. So it demonstrates your understanding of the theoretical and research issues related to your research question. Also, it shows your ability to critically evaluate relevant literature information. Right, this is very important. Of course, sometimes literature review can be written descriptively, where you just describe what is in the literature. And sometimes it could be critical, where you have to employ some critical thinking. Right, you have to think and you have to like synthesize information from what you are reading and what you want to write. So this also shows your ability to integrate and synthesize existing literature. You take various bits and pieces of information from various literature, you bring them together, synthesize them, and try to produce something that is relatively new. All right. So it also provides new theoretical insights or develop a new model as conceptual framework. So yeah, this is also possible. Your work may be to develop a model or develop a framework or create some new theory or things like that. Now, it will also help to convince your reader that your proposed research will make significant and substantial contribution to the literature. Okay, and this will help to resolve an important theoretical issue or filling a major gap in the literature. So these are some of the points that you need to watch out for while working on a literature review. Some of the problems people face is one, lack of organization and structure. After this discussion, I'm going to show you in the whiteboard how to create a structure for your literature review. There's a lack of focus, unity, and coherence. That means you have bits and pieces of information that don't seem to flow. There's no flow, they are incoherent, they don't seem, it's just like a mashup of different types of information. You need to make sure you create something that is logical and something that flows from one point to the other, from paragraph to paragraph, and from section to section. Also, it could be repetitive and verbose, which means you just keep writing unnecessarily. All right. Usually, the best writing is done that is very brief. Okay. Brief doesn't mean that you submit just a few lines or a few paragraphs as your literature review. You have to make sure you carry out a thorough literature review but you don't use verbal statements and repetitive statements. You have to make sure you go straight to the point. Also, some people fail to cite influential papers. You have to know what are the most successful researchers in that area of your research, okay, or the most recognized, right, or celebrated researchers in that area. And you have to make sure that you give them credit and, cite them. Failing to keep up with recent development as well. This is another problem. Sometimes you find some people's reference list and it's going back to 1980s, 1970s. I mean, we are in 2021. So basically, if you're going to do anything now, it means that it has to be something you have to cite or you have to review what has been done more recently, like in the last 5 to 10 years. Okay. You don't want to be reading papers that were done in 1960s, except those papers are papers that set the background or set the groundwork or the theories for that research domain. There are some papers like that, you have to cite them, those even if they are very old. But when you talk about recent developments in that area and recent advancements in that area, you don't want to cite papers that were published more than 10 years ago. You need to see something that is more recent. Now, also, people fail to critically evaluate the cited paper. Sometimes people only just mention this information without critically employing any critical thinking. And what's the benefit? What can we derive from this information? You don't have to leave this to the readers. Try to critically evaluate the information and talk about it. Now, also citing irrelevant or trivial references, like I've told you many times, you may cite some web pages or especially if it has to do with data, okay, government data and things like that. But you just can't go around citing every web page that you find online. These are irrelevant, especially to academic research. Also, depending too much on secondary sources. Secondary sources means sources that are not, when you try to cite a primary information or a definition of a concept, you want to use the primary source. That's the original source of that information and not some other secondary source that is only transmitting that information. So now there are different ways of organizing your literature review. This is one of the things I'm going to discuss with you. One of them is to make use of subheadings, which is very good, to bring order to and coherence your research. So now let's say, for example, your literature review is 2.0. Okay, let me write here. 2.0. Okay, you have what you call literature review. All right. What you could do is that you could start with an opening paragraph where you briefly introduce what you want to discuss in this section. Okay, few lines here, and then you start with 2.1. Now, your literature review should have various concepts. It depends on what you want to talk about. You should be able to break it down into probably 4 to 5 sub-paragraphs. Okay, and each of them, subsections or subheadings. And each of them may even have further subheadings. Okay, so 2.1, you have another heading. Then you may have 2.1.1, or you have another heading. And then 2.1.2, depending on how much information you have. And then you may move to 2.2. Okay, so this is how you come up with your literature review section. So having established the importance of your research area and its current state of development, you may devote several sections to issues such as theoretical models. For example, if you're going to talk about models, approaches, frameworks, instruments, things like that, you may want to devote different sections of your work to that. You may also have, as I always tell the students, in the last section, 2.5, if that is the last section of your work or your literature review, you can have what we call previous studies section. Okay, or previous research studies. Okay, in this case, you simply summarize the work that has been done by others. Okay, so you have about 5, 6 studies that you're going to review and summarize. What were the aims of those studies? Okay, what were the objectives of those studies? And what were the main results or the methodology that was used? Next, what were the methodology or methods that were used? And then what were the main findings of that study? So you get this information from that and you summarize it into a paragraph. And you do this for another study and you do this for another study. This is what you call previous research studies or review of previous research studies. So like this, you come up with the various sections of your or literature review. So don't forget that when you're writing your literature review, as well as other parts of your research work, it's like you're telling a story. Okay, you're telling a story to an audience, and usually a story has a beginning, it has an end. Okay, you're starting from a beginning in your story, and you're moving to an end. In that case, it means you want your beginning to look like a beginning, and you want the end to actually look and sound like an end, and you have every other thing in between. Okay, so you tell a story that is engaging from the beginning and then comes to a temporary conclusion before the reader now resumes other sections of your study, like the methodology, results and findings, and all that. Okay, so try to tell it in a stimulating way. Stimulating way means an engaging and interesting way. Okay, do not bore them, don't make it boring, because it may lead to rejection of a research project, especially from the beginning. When you start your research project from the beginning and it looks verbose and incoherent without any proper direction and it looks boring, it doesn't give a good disposition. It predisposes the reader in a bad way towards your research, so that you may not be interested in continuing the reading of your work. Okay, so these are few points. These are some of the basic few points regarding the literature review. So basically, guys, what I'm going to do now is that, like I said,